Anyone watched the NXT show tonight? Let me know in the comments how it was. Sorry that the screen is flipping around here. This is Hannibal from the HannibalTV.com with a daily news update. It appears that Jack Swagger is going to fight again October the 25th at Bellator 231. The 37-year-old Jack Hagar is going to be fighting the 29-year-old Anthony Garrett. I watched one of Anthony Garrett's fights. He lost in under 30 seconds, and it was a pretty bad beating. So I think Jack will have another pretty easy fight. Jason Peterson says he'd like to see Alberto Del Rio against Jack Swagger. I'd like to see that too, but Del Rio has a much tougher opponent coming up against Tito Ortiz in December. So the guy that Swagger is fighting is 4 wins and 2 losses. One of those losses was pretty devastating. NXT, I guess no one saw it tonight because no comments about that so far. It was a pretty, nothing really stood out for me for the show. Someone says it was short and sweet, and the women's match was good. The look was slightly different. There was no more ramp. Speaking of women's wrestling, there is going to be an all-women's SmackDown on Fox that is going to air the Friday night, the week that they do their next Saudi Arabia taping, because, of course, women are not allowed to wrestle in Saudi Arabia. So all the men will be over there, and the women did. Sorry, I stopped talking there because this freaking connection is bad. The Rock and Roll Express have been added to the NWA tapings at the end of the month in Atlanta. Tickets are not selling great for them because they're in a studio and they haven't sold out yet. So Nick Aldis, I've said it a million times, he's not a good world champion. He doesn't draw. He's very boring. He doesn't bring the belt anywhere. When he introduced Dory Funk at the Cauliflower Alley this year, he didn't even bring the belt with him. So that's a shitty champion, in my opinion. There was an AEW commercial last night during SmackDown. So that's pretty funny. I'm very interested to see if AEW gets a better rating than NXT once they start going head-to-head. Very interested because from the results I read tonight, there's no real names that really stand out. So someone's asking me, what do I think about cauliflower ears? I've never been in headlocks that much, so I never developed them. That's how you usually get them, being taken out of headlocks. No, it is the connection. It's the damn connection. Someone's asking me. It's the connection. I'm going to get this fixed. I'm going to switch providers. But at least the audio is going, so you got the news. That's all the news for today. It wasn't a big news day. Oh, there's one more piece of news. I guess Jon Moxley has said that he is going to be at Wrestle Kingdom next year. So you can expect Jon Moxley at Wrestle Kingdom. Someone says they heard it's painful to drain your cauliflower ears. Not really. I've seen people do it themselves. They just buy those same needles that you would inject steroids with and like jab the needle into your ear and suck it out, but it never fully gets it out. So yeah, I'm blessed that I never had to deal with cauliflower ears. But as I said, I avoided getting in headlocks as much as possible. I don't believe I have any pins on my amateur wrestling record since my last re-immersion into amateur wrestling. After I took 10 years off, I made a comeback. The only reason I'm not still doing amateur wrestling is because there's no good places to train in the area where I live right now. I have to commute 2 hours. The Real Frisco, who is a great guy, says, Jack Swagger fighting, is he any good? He hasn't been really tested yet. He's fought very safe fights against well-selected opponents, so he hasn't really proved himself, but he does have solid amateur wrestling and grappling skills, We haven't really seen him tested in stand-up yet. So, yeah. Jack Swagger's a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but that doesn't matter. Somebody said that, but that doesn't matter. I'm a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I can beat pretty much anyone I've ever fought in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no matter what belt they are, using amateur wrestling and mixed with the grappling holds that I know. I'm not saying I'm the greatest grappler in the world, but I don't put much consideration into belts. Obviously, a guy that's high up in belts is going to be better than a white belt if he's the same size as the white belt. But I don't believe in belts. Brock Lesnar doesn't have a belt either. And by the way, here's another piece of news. Brock Lesnar, someone asked me who the best wrestler was the other day on here when I was doing one of these, and I did say Brock Lesnar. Because he is the best legitimate wrestler overall, the best draw. He's making, I believe, the most money. So you got to take that into account. Who's making the most money is probably the best. But they're putting him against Kofi Kingston on the first episode of SmackDown. Kofi Kingston has not been a successful champion. Ratings have been hitting all-time lows. House shows have been canceled. House shows have been drawing poorly. So chances are Brock Lesnar is going to be made champion on the first episode of SmackDown, since he is a very good name and would be a good guy to have on the show and representing the show as the champion. Somebody says Jack Swagger has only been fighting MMA. That's true, and it appears like this next guy is going to be a jobber too. But you can't just throw yourself in there against the top guy and expect to win. You got to build your way up. So he's playing it safe. Who is the best women's wrestler? I could not really answer that because I am not familiar with women's wrestling that much today. I could not answer that. Someone was asking me that. The one that I know is Charlotte Flair. Ronda Rousey is a women's wrestler too, but she's not an active women wrestler wrestling continuously. And from what I understand, she might be taking a break. So I wouldn't even Brock Lesnar is not full-time either, but at least he's wrestling consistently. And he was in the wrestling business a very long time, unlike Ronda Rousey. So, yeah, thanks for all of your questions. Would GNW do intergender matches? Someone's asking me. We have done them. Check them out. One of them actually has 3 million hits on this channel, which is the highest hit video of any match on this channel. Serpentina versus Chaz. And it wasn't even a good match, but somehow it has 3 million hits. So there is a fan base out there for intergender wrestling. However, any intergender match we have not actually planned to do that we've had. It's been a case where a woman has not shown up, and we've had no choice but to replace the female with a male because there hasn't been an extra woman in the back. The last time we did it, Jordan Grace no-showed us last August, and she's a complete bitch in my opinion. Didn't even do a sorry video for the fans. I spent money on a flight for her, and she definitely could have made it to the show if she had wanted to. So we ended up having to put Lady Yasmin against a male wrestler in that match instead. And that has, 20,000 hits, which is more hits than the last Lady Yasmin versus Jessica Black match has. So there is an interest in intergender wrestling, but yeah, how is Brock going to improve ratings when he's not going to wrestle on SmackDown after he wins the belt? Well, he's the best known wrestler. So it's good to say that Brock Lesnar is the champion as far as just having wrestling on your channel. That's a good thing. Who else are you going to make champion? Like Kofi Kingston, I'm sorry, he's a nice guy, but your average person is not going to be a fan of him. He's small. He has a very fruity gimmick that your average jock is not going to be a fan of that. Brock Lesnar looks like a man. He looks tough. He looks like a guy. If you were walking on the street, you would not want to mess with him, unlike a lot of champions these days. So yeah, that's why I believe they will make him the champion. There's a bunch of Gangrel had a great entrance. Anthony Carano says, or Carino. Yes, Gangrel. I actually defeated him. Look up that match on the Hannibal TV. One more thing for anyone watching this. Shane Douglas, I'm doing a Skype GNW podcast interview with him tomorrow. Anyone with questions for Shane Douglas, leave them for me in the comments of this video. I did a shoot interview with him, which was a great shoot interview, and he's a great guest, underrated wrestler. Someone says Kofi is not champ material, looks like a kid throwing pancakes. I haven't actually seen him throw pancakes, but I heard that's his gimmick. Cain Velasquez in AAA. He only has one more match left in AAA, and as I said yesterday, I believe he will sign with WWE because Goldberg has started chirping him already. And I just mentioned earlier, they're going back to Saudi Arabia at the end of October. You know, those people like to bring stars. They paid over $1 million for certain stars. That's a lot of money for a guy like Cain Velasquez, who made $450,000 reportedly for his last fight. And keep in mind, you got to train for those fights, do heavy sparring sessions, then pay percentages to your managers and stuff. So if he was to sign with the company, he could make the most money in WWE. AEW, they could throw him a massive offer, but who's he going to wrestle in AEW in big money matches? There's really only Chris Jericho that's a top star, and Chris Jericho is much smaller than Cain Velasquez. So, and he could continue with AAA too if he signs with AEW, but he is 37. So maybe he'll just go where he can make the most money. If I was to bet, I would bet Cain will go to WWE. So, yeah. Cain hasn't won a match in a long time. Well, his last match was a weird finish at UFC Phoenix. It was really weird. And if I were him, why would you do another MMA fight when you could make more money in professional wrestling and not have to train as hard and actually become more famous, because WWE would promote the hell out of him. So somebody says feed him to Ryback. I don't know. Does anyone out there think AEW is going to take Ryback? He wanted something like $4,000 for an hour shoot interview with me in the brief conversation I had with him in the past, which I thought was pretty ridiculous considering I put them out free. I don't charge people for DVDs and stuff. That's the only communication I've had with him. And to wrestle, he was something like $5,000. So I felt that was too much to use him in Great North Wrestling. But yeah, that was one of the highest demands I ever had for a shoot interview. Paul Roma also wanted $2,000, which I thought was pretty high for Paul Roma, considering like how many people, like me doing a shoot interview with him and putting it out free. Would you guys agree with me that that would actually help Paul Roma's career at this stage? But to want something like $2,000 for that, that's a little much. So someone is saying Ryback said he wants to be in AEW. So, yeah, we'll see if he shows up in AEW. And there was one other note that it's coming back to me. It's coming back to me. Fuck. Oh, someone says I ever traveled to Colombia. No, I have not. But the other note I was going to bring up that is ridiculous is Kevin Owens is supposedly wrestling on the WWE house shows this weekend, and he was just fired. So I heard Brian Alvarez say on the Wrestling Observer Radio that, and he watches the program. As much as my reviews might get hits, if I actually watched the programs and reviewed them, I value my life too much than to waste them watching a WWE show. The most I'll watch is a Twitter or YouTube clip. But it was said on the Wrestling Observer Radio that the WWE's writing is at an all-time low for quality. So that tells you something about Bruce Pritchard and Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff being back. But Kevin Owens being fired and then already being back on the house shows is just a good example of how bad that writing is. So thanks for the tons of questions, and sorry about this issue with the screen. I'm going to call my provider again tomorrow. And leave comments for Shane Douglas if anyone wants a question. Oh, and someone said Blind Bill or Bill Bird, the ratings and attendance are lower than 92 to 94. That's saying something. So that's interesting. The difference now is wrestlers have guaranteed contracts and there's more TV revenue than there was in 93, 94. So that's interesting. I remember being at a house show in Kingston, Ontario in 1994. There was Lex Luger against Tatanka, the Smoking Guns against the Heavenly Bodies, Mantar against Duke the Dumpster Drosy. Those are some of the matches that stand out for that. And there was literally under 1,000 people at that show. I remember it. Like the stands were empty and the ringside wasn't full. That was the lowest I ever saw a WWE house show that I attended. And there were some bad ones in Hull, Quebec. I remember a couple nights after Survivor Series 96, before Austin really took off, there was a show in Hull, Quebec with The Rock. It was the first time I saw The Rock live. And they had like maybe 1,200 people at that with a stacked card. Mankind was on that show. And I remember I waited after to get autographs, and The Rock was in the same car with Rikishi, who was the Sultan. And I forget who was driving. But I remember The Rock, he walked to the car and he put his hand up like that. And he said, "Fuck off," to all the kids, and walked into the car. And the funny thing was, the Sultan was sitting in the other seat in the back seat, and he actually rolled down the window and signed autographs. So it was kind of awkward for The Rock that like was expecting to just jump into the car and drive off. But yeah, I know The Rock has changed since then, and I'm a fan of his, but I will always remember that night as a kid, and the attendance was really bad. Did Shane ever get their job back at Target after leaving wrestling? That's Shane Douglas. Supposedly he was a manager at Target at one point. But, I mean, wasn't that after ECW and WCW closed, he was not in WWE, and he has a family. So you got to support your family. Now, you can work at Target and suck it up, or you can overdose on pills and kill yourself. Or you can just become an alcoholic and end up in rehab. Yeah, it sucks when you go from being a star to having to work a regular job. Trust me, for 4 years, I was wrestling full-time in Puerto Rico, and I had to go back to crappy jobs when I got back. And yeah, that's horrible. So, yeah, I still work a normal job.